You're probably wondering which one of the legs is wooden at this point in time, I would imagine, and I'm not going to tell you about that. The phrase massaging life into a wooden leg actually comes from Central and Eastern Europe. And what it means is, how do you bring a dormant seed to life? Or, actually, as I like to think about it, how do you make the impossible possible? And what I want to talk to you about this afternoon is exactly that, how some people can make impossible things possible. My accent is not from the city, as you might have gathered. I was brought up in the northeast of England on what you call a project, what we call a council estate. I was lucky, had a very good, supportive family who looked after me. I went off to school, I had opportunities. From that, I went to university. From university, I could choose my career. But if I looked over my shoulder where I grew up, some people weren't so lucky. And I think it behoves us who've climbed the ladder to maybe look back occasionally and help people up a few rungs. And that's my motivation for getting involved in things. And it's 30 years ago that I started to work in homelessness. As a volunteer, I was teaching in a school in London, and I used to get up on a morning and go into a day centre called The Passage, working with homeless people around the corner, and I'd turn the ovens on, I'd help to make breakfast, I'd serve it out, talk to the guys, do a bit of washing up, not very much, and then leave and then go back and teach for the day back at the school. And after a while, I suddenly realised that this was what was giving me life. The teaching was great, but this was actually what was giving me life. So I took a job in the homelessness sector, and 26 years ago, I was asked, along with a group of other people, to help set up a charity called Depaul International that I still work for. And from one very, very small night shelter in North London, we've now grown to work in 6 countries with over 100 projects, working with about 15,000 homeless people across the globe. Thank you very much for that. It's been an incredible experience. I've learned a lot about how organisations work, but most importantly, I've learned a lot about the power of people and the power of leaders. You know, over those 25 years, a lot of people have said to me, that's impossible. You can't work in that country, it's too corrupt. Or, you know, you can't, your goals are too ambitious, you'll never achieve them. I want to tell you something. It's actually a very good thing to be ambitious for people out there that need help. It's a really good thing. It's absolutely possible to do the impossible. And I could tell you lots of stories, but I want to just share one with you. This photograph that I've just put up was taken in the back of a minibus called Depolka, one of our minibuses in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, a city called Kharkiv, around about 7 miles from the Russian border. And Kharkiv, in the Soviet times, was the place where the tanks were built. It's a big industrial city, very dark. It has the largest square in Europe where the tanks used to be exhibited. You might have heard of it because it's actually the closest city at the moment to the Donbass region, where Russian separatists and Ukrainian forces are in battle. And as a result of that, around about 1 million people have left Donbass as internally displaced people up through Kharkiv and spread out trying to find sanctuary across Ukraine. And we're helping many of them. Anyway, that's just to set the scene. This photograph predates that conflict. In it, you can see 2 young boys called Ivan and Vladimir, and they're 14 years of age, and they're freezing cold. It's a November night, and they've been outside all day, and they're sat on that van and they're enjoying a borscht, a thick beetroot soup. They're reaching for some bread to fill themselves up. They've got some hot, sweet tea there to get some energy. And afterwards, we're going to give them a piece of chocolate because they're children, and they like chocolate. That's one of the things they really like. They're 2 of literally hundreds of street children living on the street in Kharkiv. And when I say living on the street, actually they live under the street. So they live in the sewer systems, in the central heating ducts. They put their sleeping bags on hot water pipes to keep warm. They live in gangs of 8 to 12. The youngest we found was about 8 years of age when we were there. And they live by a mixture of begging, petty theft. Occasionally they might get a job on the market to do something. Usually in each gang there would be 2 girls, and if need be, one of those girls would prostitute themselves to get money to feed the rest of the gang. A very dark place that they were living. Glue was the drug of choice. Self-harm, very evident, especially on the girls that we met. A year before this photograph was taken, I was in Kharkiv, underground, doing an assessment of these young people. And my translator was a young guy called Vitaly Novak. He's a Vincentian priest, actually. Not that that matters for this story. That's him on a horse in Transcarpathia. He also drives an old Russian car like it's Formula 1 around the cities of Kharkiv. He's the chaplain to the Hells Angels of Poland. And he rides on a motorbike across Europe every year to do this pilgrimage. He speaks 7 languages fluently. He lights up a room when he walks into it. He's just an amazing character. And he has a laugh that gets everybody involved. But when we were underground this night, the last thing that Vitaly was doing was laughing. He couldn't translate. The emotions were so deep at the stories that were being told, he was having to hesitate. So when we left and walked back to the hotel that night, we went for a drink. And Vitaly said to me, "Mark, I have to do something for these children. I don't know what it is, but I want to do something. Will you help me? What must be done? What can I do?" So I said to Vitaly, "Find some friends who are interested in this, and I'll pay for them to fly to the UK and Ireland, and they can visit our projects and see what we do." And a few weeks later, they were on a plane and we toured around. And we visited our day centres, our outreach, our hostels, our night shelters, our medical services, our employment and training, and they were overwhelmed at these riches that we had to serve homeless people. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. At the same time, our staff were overwhelmed by the stories that Vitaly was telling them. And so we agreed together, let's do something. Let's start a subsidiary, but let's keep it simple. So Vitaly said, "Good, let's keep it simple." So he went back to Ukraine, and he went to Moscow, and he bought this minibus, Depolka. He drove it, it's gas-powered, back into Kharkiv. He ripped out all the seats himself. On one end, he put a soup urn. On the other side, he put a curtain so a nurse could sit behind it. And in the middle, he put a table and benches where young people could sit around, because table fellowship's important in Ukraine. It's a very important part of the culture. And 3 weeks later, he rang me and he said, "Right, I'm off." And I said, "Good, a simple start." Anything but simple. In the first week, pulled in by the police, the entire team 3 times. Pulled in for questioning. Same questions all the time. These kids don't deserve this help. If you feed them like this, they'll come back every night. To which Vitaly said, "That's exactly the point. I want them to come back every night. I want them to feel this kindness." After a while, the police relaxed and we were allowed to continue. But the local authority made it even more difficult. Every single night that we went out, we had to drive the minibus to a garage for a mechanic to check that the bus was fit for service. So he had to sign it off. Then we'd have to drive to a hospital to get the driver checked that he was fit to drive the bus. Every single night. We got up to feeding 50 children a night, 7 days a week. For every meal, every single meal, every night, we had to fill out 32 different forms for different departments of the local authority. Now, I know you have your IRS tax returns, right? But by any measure, this was big. The costs of administration were actually higher than the costs of delivering the services. And you know, I would have given in at this point. I think I would have surrendered personally. But Vitaly taught me this story about under communism. He said, you know, if you went out and you were shopping, you know, and you looked to kind of buy something, and you saw a line, you call it a line, we call it a queue, wrapped around a building, you joined it. You didn't know what was at the end of it, but you hoped it was going to be something good. I think that's very profound as a story. For things to happen, it might take a long time, and you don't know what is at the end of it, but you have to join the queue. And Vitaly began to do that with great resilience. 10 years later, Vitaly is the chair of a charity in Ukraine working with 4,500 homeless people across 4 cities. Yeah? The numbers of street children, thank goodness, have declined because of the introduction of fostering and adoption within Ukraine, but we branched out. We have day centres for older homeless people. We have shelters for homeless men and women that are there. We even have a mother and baby unit working with mothers that we find in the railway stations and on the streets. If we didn't house them, their babies would be taken away from them altogether. So what's the learning from this? Well, the learning from this is there are hundreds of Vitalis out there around the world. And do you know how I know this? Because they get in touch with me. They send me messages. I get emails. I get texts. I get introduced at conference to people. And all of them want to do the same thing. And what they want is what Vitali had. They want somebody to recognise them when they make the call to do something. They want somebody to dream with them, to encourage them to do things. They need the training to get the right skills together. They need the resources to begin to do things. They need the networks to know what is good practice and what is bad practice. And they need a long-term commitment to walk alongside them to make a difference. Yeah? So my latest impossible thing is called the Institute of Global Homelessness. And what we're going to do is for emerging leaders around the world, and we've just finished our first cohort here at Depaul, we're going to provide them with these things. That's what we're going to do. We're going to have a bigger ambition than that as well. We're going to bring the existing leaders in the world of research in homelessness, policy, advocacy, and practice together. And we're going to set an overarching goal of ending street homelessness in 150 cities by 2030. And people will say, that's impossible. And I don't believe them. I think it's possible entirely to do it. And what can you do? What's your takeaway from this tonight? Well, look, you could do what I did. You could go and volunteer in a day centre or night shelter. That's how I started. It might even change your life. You never know. Yeah? You could think about maybe if you have a business out there offering a job or a placement to somebody who's leaving homelessness. You might even think about mentoring somebody going through that process. You might even think about mentoring somebody like Vitali, if you've got the skill set to do that and to grow a business. But here's the simple thing you could do. When you leave this afternoon, you could go and say hello to somebody sleeping in a shop doorway. You could do that. The kids in this photo that are laughing in Depolka, they don't come along just for the bread, just for the soup. You know, they don't come along just for the chocolate, just for the borscht. They don't come along just for the medical advice. They come along because for half an hour in one day, somebody's treated them with kindness and respect, involved them in a conversation. Homelessness is a physical state, but actually it's a spiritual separation. And just half an hour in a day of a conversation can end that. So look, go out. If you find a wooden leg, massage it to life. Yeah? With 2 legs, you run that much quicker. We get to the finish line, we end homelessness. Thank you.